In the early 11th century, England was in chaos. Æthelred, the Unready, king of the English, struggled to fend off Viking invaders. Despite desperate attempts to pay them off with Danegeld, a tribute to prevent Viking attacks, the raids continued. In 1016, Æthelred died, leaving a kingdom on the brink of collapse. With his passing, England entered a period of turmoil as the Vikings seized the opportunity to conquer the weakened land. Canute, a fierce and ambitious Viking prince, set his sights on the English throne. He led his forces in a brutal campaign against Æthelred's son, Edmund Ironside. After several bloody battles, Edmund and Canute eventually agreed to divide England between them. But only weeks later, Edmund died and Canute became the undisputed king of England. As the first Viking king of England, Canute ruled over a vast North Sea empire that included Denmark and Norway. But his reign wasn't just about conquest. Canute embraced English culture, married Æthelred's widow Emma of Normandy, and promised to protect the church, winning the loyalty of many English nobles. In 1035, Canute died and his empire began to fracture. His sons Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut vied for control of England. After years of division and struggle, Harthacnut briefly ruled as king, but his reign was short-lived. When Harthacnut died unexpectedly, the throne passed to Edward, son of Æthelred. Edward's return to England was the beginning of a new chapter. As the last king of the ancient House of Wessex, he symbolized a link to the old Anglo-Saxon dynasty that had ruled for centuries. Edward the Confessor was born in 1003 in Oxfordshire, the seventh son of King Æthelred, the Unready, and his second wife, Emma of Normandy. He grew up with his siblings, Alfred and Godwin, but life in England was far from peaceful. His childhood was marked by relentless Viking raids, led by Sweyn Forkbeard and his son Canute. The situation grew dire in 1013 when Sweyn seized the English throne. Edward and his mother Emma fled to Normandy, their family forced into exile. Not long after, even Æthelred joined them, leaving behind a kingdom in turmoil. But in February 1014, Sweyn died unexpectedly, and leading English nobles saw a chance to restore Æthelred. They invited him back to England, on the condition that he would rule more justly. Æthelred accepted, sending young Edward ahead with his ambassadors as a sign of good faith. However, peace was fleeting. In April 1016, Æthelred passed away, and Edward's older brother, Edmund Ironside, took up the crown. Edmund fought valiantly against Canute in a desperate bid to hold the kingdom. Despite his determination, Edmund eventually agreed to divide England with Canute. But only weeks later, Edmund died, and with his death, Canute claimed the entire kingdom, forcing Æthelred's remaining heirs back into exile. For the second time, Edward found himself in exile, spending his formative years in the Norman court. Here, he grew close to his mother's family and embraced his Norman heritage. Edward spent over 25 years in exile, mainly in Normandy. During this time, Edward received steadfast support from his sister Godwin, who had married into the powerful family of Drogo of Mantes, the Count of Vaxend. Together, they kept Edward's hopes alive, as whispers of his claim to the throne began to spread across continental Europe. In 1034, Robert, Duke of Normandy, and Edward's cousin even attempted an invasion to place Edward on the English throne. However, fate intervened once more. A fleet was blown off course and landed in Jersey, preventing any chance of success. Despite this setback, Edward's claim continued to gain strength. Prominent abbots and religious leaders from continental monasteries rallied behind him, seeing in Edward a rightful king who might restore stability to England. Throughout these years, Edward's experiences in exile seemed only to deepen his faith. Known for his intense personal piety, he spent hours in prayer. His growing reputation as a deeply devout man attracted attention from several abbots who believed that in Edward, England could have a God-fearing king dedicated to peace and justice. In 1035, Canute the Great died. With Harthacnut, his designated heir, occupied as King of Denmark, the kingdom faced a power vacuum. To maintain control, it was decided that Harold Harefoot, Canute's elder son, would serve as regent in England, while Queen Emma held Wessex on Harthacnut's behalf. But tension quickly escalated. In 1036, Edward and his younger brother Alfred made a bold move. They returned to England, hoping to assess the situation and perhaps reclaim their heritage. Tragically, Alfred's journey took a dark turn. Captured by Godwin, the powerful Earl of Wessex, he was handed over to Harold Harefoot. In a brutal act of cruelty, Harold ordered that Alfred be blinded with red-hot pokers, a violent and permanent way to make him unfit for kingship. Alfred died shortly after from his wounds. Edward fought a skirmish near Southampton, where he scored a small victory against Harold's forces. However, the situation was far too dangerous for a full confrontation. Recognizing the threat, Edward quickly retreated back to Normandy, abandoning any immediate attempt to reclaim his birthright. In 1037, Harold Harefoot was accepted as King of England. Queen Emma was stripped of power and forced to flee to Bruges in Flanders. As the widow of both Æthelred the Unready and Canute the Great, Emma held a unique position of influence and authority, especially over the region of Wessex. This role gave her significant power and aligned her with the supporters of Harthacnut, Canute's legitimate heir, who was still in Denmark at the time. Harold Harefoot, Canute's son from a different mother, had a weaker claim to the throne, and saw Emma's loyalty to Harthacnut as a potential challenge to his own ambitions. Emma's exile effectively weakened Harthacnut's support network in England, allowing Harold to rule without interference from his stepmother. So Emma reached out to Edward, urging him to come to her aid and support Harthacnut's claim to the throne. But Edward found himself powerless. With no resources to launch an invasion, he declined his mother's request. Publicly, he disclaimed any interest in the throne, knowing that without resources or support, any move against Harold would be doomed. Meanwhile, Harthacnut, having finally secured his rule in Denmark, prepared an invasion of England, but fate would intervene yet again. In 1040, before Harthacnut could set sail, Harold Harefoot died, removing the last obstacle to Harthacnut's peaceful succession. In 1041, Edward's half-brother King Harthacnut of England invited Edward to return from exile. Knowing he had no direct heir, Harthacnut saw Edward as the next in line to the throne. In June 1042, however, Harthacnut died suddenly, leaving the throne vacant. With the support of powerful allies like Godwin, Edward was poised to take his place as king. As king, Edward faced a difficult choice regarding his mother, Queen Emma. Though she was a powerful figure, Edward harbored resentment toward her. She had favored his half-brother Harthacnut and had shown little support for Edward during his years of exile. Feeling abandoned by her, Edward saw her influence and wealth as a threat to his rule. Edward moved decisively and stripped his mother of her property and influence, cutting off her power base in England. Queen Emma lived in relative obscurity until her death in 1052. With Emma's influence removed, Edward turned his attention fully to ruling England. Meanwhile, Edward's leadership bore the mark of his Norman heritage, a legacy from his years in exile. Perhaps the most enduring symbol of this influence was the creation of Westminster Abbey, a grand project that Edward initiated in 1042. The Abbey was the first Norman Romanesque church in England, a powerful display of Edward's cultural ties to the continent and his devotion to the church. His visible Norman influence stirred unease among his English subjects, and even resentment among powerful nobles who saw these ties as foreign and disruptive to English traditions. To bridge the growing divide, Edward sought to ally himself with the most influential Anglo-Saxon family in England, the Godwins. In 1045, Edward married Edith, the daughter of Earl Godwin of Wessex. Edith, known for her intelligence and political skill, became queen, and the alliance brought the Godwins closer to the crown. With Edith as queen, the Godwins wielded considerable power, holding vast lands across England. Godwin, as the Earl of Wessex, was a formidable force in the kingdom. Godwin, deeply rooted in Anglo-Saxon traditions, sought to place trusted Saxons in key court positions, seeing this as a way to preserve the kingdom's identity and stability. Edward, however, favored Normans, men he had known during his time abroad. This cultural and political divide between the king and his most powerful noble created an uneasy partnership. Further straining Edward's relationship with the Godwins was the behavior of Godwin's eldest son, Earl Swegan, also known as Sweyn. Reckless and unpredictable, Swegan's actions brought embarrassment and scandal to the family. In one infamous incident, he kidnapped the abbess of Leominster, a shocking violation of both religious and social norms. Later, he committed a heinous crime, murdering his cousin Earl Bjorn. This act of violence horrified the nobility and undermined the Godwin family's reputation. In 1051, tensions reached a breaking point. A violent dispute erupted in Dover between townspeople and a visiting noble with ties to Normandy. Seeing this as an opportunity to challenge Godwin's power, Edward ordered Godwin the Earl of Kent to punish the townspeople. However, Godwin refused. Edward seized the chance and, backed by Norman allies, he banished Godwin and his family from England, which included Edward's own wife, Edith. Yet the Godwins would not remain in exile for long. In 1052, Godwin and his sons returned with military force, reclaiming their lands and positions. Faced with strong opposition and limited support, Edward had no choice but to reinstate Godwin and his family, reluctantly welcoming them back to court. In the later years of Edward's reign, the king gradually distanced himself from the intense politics of his court. Following morning prayers, he preferred to engage in gentlemanly pursuits, leaving much of England's day-to-day governance in the hands of the Godwin family. As Edward withdrew, Godwin and his family seized control, effectively ruling England in the king's name. Earl Godwin's influence over the nobility grew as he managed the kingdom's affairs. In 1053, Godwin died, leaving his legacy in the hands of his capable son, Harold Godwinson. Harold inherited his father's titles and became one of the most powerful men in England. He quickly proved himself by suppressing rebellions in the north and leading successful campaigns against the Welsh, securing the kingdom's stability. Harold's leadership and loyalty to Edward earned the king's respect, and he began to see Harold as a natural successor, yet this created a dilemma. Years earlier, Edward had allegedly promised the throne to his cousin, William, Duke of Normandy, later known as William the Conqueror, hoping to establish closer ties with the continent. As Edward's health declined in late 1065, the question of succession loomed large. Edward's promise to William clashed with Harold's rise to power, setting the stage for a contentious dispute. On January 5, 1066, Edward the Confessor passed away, leaving a kingdom on the brink of chaos. Harold, supported by the English nobility, took the crown. William viewed Harold's coronation as a betrayal. He prepared an invasion, setting off a chain of events that would culminate in one of the most pivotal battles in English history, the Battle of Hastings,